You know, when we think about what it takes to be a teacher, our minds usually go to subject knowledge, right? Knowing your math, your history, your science. But what if I told you that's barely scratching the surface? Today, we're cracking open a tactical playbook that shows you what teaching is really about. It's a world where your main job is just managing pure, unadulterated chaos. And get this isn't some made-up, wild hypothetical. This is a real scenario given to people in teaching interviews. Just picture it for a second. You're at the board, writing something out, and bam, a face full of sand. That's the kind of high-stakes, completely unpredictable situation that teachers are expected to handle in an instant. So, what is your next move? Do you send the kid to the principal? Do you try to figure out why on earth there's a box of sand in your classroom? Your answer here, it matters more than you can possibly imagine. In an interview, you make the wrong call and your application goes right in the trash. No second chances. To even begin to understand the right move, we have to look at the first layer of this playbook, the school's hidden operating system. Long before a teacher even walks into a classroom, they have to navigate this huge administrative machine, and that is what the interviewers are really testing you on.
For example, you might think a syllabus is the whole plan, right? Wrong. The syllabus, that's just the final destination. The scheme of work, on the other hand, that's the turn-by-turn roadmap. It's the daily, weekly plan. Proving you get the difference between the what and the how is a massive first test.
And that roadmap is just one piece of this whole policy stack. Interviewers want to see that you get all of it. But look, this isn't a memory test. When they ask about, say, the orphans and vulnerable children policy or the school feeding policy, they're not checking if you've memorized it. They're checking if you understand the very real, systemic challenges your students are dealing with every single day.
Okay, so let's peel back another layer. Because managing the policies and the students, that's only half the job. The other half, and let's be honest, often the much harder half, is managing the other adults. The playbook shows us that the staff room, well, it can be a real battleground, and you have to prove you can survive it.
In fact, the playbook has this fantastic, almost dramatic word for all that workplace drama: commotion. And we're not just talking about a simple disagreement here. We're talking about that deep-seated tension, the whispered comments, the factions that form. It's a real, tangible thing that you're expected to manage.
And you better believe they're going to test you on it with a scenario just like this one. Now, this question is designed to make you defensive. Your gut reaction is probably to fight back, right? Or complain to the principal. And guess what? That is a failing answer. The interview panel wants to see if you can rise above the commotion and use some real diplomacy.
Which brings us to the golden rule of commotion, and it's so important. Reconciliation comes first. Team building comes second. You can't just throw a staff pizza party and hope a serious conflict goes away. You have to actually address the root of the problem before you can try to bring everyone together. So how do you do it? Well, you don't just wing it. You build your answer around these 8 official values from the ministry. When you're being criticized, the winning answer isn't to get defensive. It's to demonstrate professionalism, to show empathy, to seek a respectful dialogue. You literally use the conflict to prove how mature and professional you are.
All right, now we get to the absolute core of the playbook. This is probably the most brilliant, game-changing idea in the whole thing. It's a framework for crisis management that boils down to one question. Are you dealing with a decision or are you dealing with a problem? And apparently, people mix these two up all the time in interviews, and it's a huge reason they fail.
The difference is so simple, but it's also profound. A decision is for a one-off emergency, something that just pops up. Think a fire alarm. It requires you to act now, before you investigate. A problem, though, that's a recurring pattern. It's something that keeps happening, and it requires you to investigate before you take any big action.
Let's use a medical analogy. A decision, that's like applying a tourniquet. An EMT arrives at an accident. Someone's bleeding badly. They don't stop and ask about the person's medical history. They take immediate, decisive action to stop the bleeding. That's a decision.
But a problem? That's totally different. That's like diagnosing a chronic illness. If a patient comes in with migraines they've had for a year, you don't just rush them into surgery. No, you run tests, you ask questions, you investigate the root cause. You diagnose before you treat.
So the playbook lays this perfect little trap. In this scenario, the school feeding program fails on a certain Friday. One specific day. See? It's a short-lived, one-time event. This calls for a quick, localized decision to get things back on track for that afternoon.
But watch what happens with just a tiny change in the wording. Now it's learners sleeping any day the food doesn't show up.
That phrase, any day, is the tell. It signals a chronic, recurring pattern. This is no longer a simple decision. It's a complex problem. And if your solution is just to wake the kids up, you've completely missed the point and failed the interview. You treated a systemic hunger issue like it was a minor discipline problem.
So, knowing when to be an EMT and when to be a detective is absolutely crucial. But a truly great teacher does more than just put out fires. They have a vision. And the final layer of this playbook is all about how master teachers connect their own personal goals to these huge national standards. See, your vision can't just be some pet project you're passionate about. A winning answer in an interview takes a tangible idea like, say, starting a school garden to help with food security, and surgically attaches it to these 5 official pillars from the education ministry. You show them how your small idea serves their big picture. But that brings up a really important question, doesn't it? It's easy to talk about these big, fuzzy concepts like equity in an interview. But how do you actually make that a real thing on a random Tuesday morning in a 45-minute class?
Well, the playbook's answer is just brilliantly practical. You achieve things like equity and access by changing up your teaching methods to hit every single learning style. Think about it. If you only stand up there and lecture, you're really only teaching the kids who learn verbally and logically. You're denying access to everyone else. Real equity is making sure the information gets through to every kind of brain in that room.
And when you put all of these pieces together, the mastery of the system, the political skill, the crisis triage, you finally see the truth. Teaching isn't a performance. It's not just about being good at explaining things. It's a profound act of systemic architecture.
And that brings us right back to the most powerful tool in this whole playbook. Because this framework isn't just for teachers. I mean, we all face chaos, right? We all make our worst mistakes when we throw a quick fix decision at a deep, chronic problem in our own lives, or when we freeze up and overanalyze a true emergency. So the next time you're facing a crisis, ask yourself this. Is this a box of sand, something that requires an immediate, firm action? Or is this a chronic problem, something that demands I step back and start diagnosing?